welcome back. I'm bringing on my final guest, last but not least, Sam Rumbelow, who is an actor and a method acting coach. He's been coaching for 10 years, and as I was saying before the break, he recently worked with Gillian Wearing on her film Self-Made. So please welcome Sam Rumbelow. Welcome. Could you tell us a bit about what drew you to method acting?
There was a course coming to London with an American teacher, and I thought that would be good. I could learn how to cry on cue. And that seemed to be the arsenal that I seemed to be missing between me being mediocre and a megastar. So I kind of initially went with a very kind of clear, aggressive, ulterior motive. But when I walked into the room and expecting to find a guy like a kind of Al Pacino lookalike, faded demons, and I found this kind of bald-headed, strange-looking guy in a tight-fitting Pierre Cardin suit. And everything he said was just a kind of kismet, really. It was like a sense of jumbled thoughts in my head were succinctly put together. And from that moment, it put me into a groove that seemed to make a lot of sense to me, creatively, not just as an actor at that time, but subsequently in all fields, really.
So could you tell us a little bit more about the actual technique?
Method obviously is a broad field of schools of theory, but they all go root back to Stanislavski, who was a great Russian teacher. And he started to work with the notion that acting was more than the conscious understanding of script and character and all the things that we can tell ourselves to do on a conscious plane. And he would talk about Pavlov's dogs. And the central notion of it, I suppose, is how do you facilitate the creative state of being? You know, when we feel self-aware and awkward and uninspired, how do you find a truth inside of yourself that suddenly makes you relate? You know, suddenly I don't see you, I see you as my mother, my sister, the person in the drama. And it's that transformation, that arc into a relationship with the imaginary given circumstances. And for Strasberg, it was very much around the notion of two areas: relaxation, that the actor must be able to contemplate their truth, their reality at first, to then be able to sate that and relax from that and move on, to then pick up the tools that created inspiration, like sense memory. So we'd say personalization or affective memory or overall sensation. You would literally shift your state of being. But it puts you in a place where you suddenly feel more related to something which is fictitious than you do the truth around you. And that's what we call the creative state of being or inspired. So that's the root of it.
And what role does the unconscious play in the creative state?
Huge. The unconscious is the large proportion of our psyche, of ourself. We do so many things innately unconsciously. We know in sports, for instance, that athletes use their muscles. The unconscious is about an eighth trillionth faster than the conscious mind. You can't tell yourself to hit a tennis ball. You can practice it, you can learn it, but you absorb it into the unconscious, and then it becomes about aspiration. And it's the same in acting. You can analyze the script, you can analyze the scene, you can do all the conscious preparation. You need to contextualize, you need to relate to it, but then how do you make it come alive? How do you make it even more truthful? I mean, that's the first thing, is that we go to theatres, we turn on TVs, and we know we're looking at something fictitious, but strangely it's more truthful than a lot of the things we perceive around it. It seems to inspire us more when it's well done than actually the day-to-day stuff, and we're seen to be drawn to it, that it seems to speak to us on an unconscious level.
I know that you have done 12 years of Jungian analysis, so what led you to that?
Well, it started with method because I walked in the room. There's an exercise called song and dance, which is a very powerful, simple exercise, which really mirrors back to you where you really are, not where you think you like to be. And I thought I was this gregarious, extroverted, free, you know, I thought I was free with my thoughts and it's an exercise which requires you to do simple movement and simple sounds. And I suddenly realized I didn't like staying still. I felt I was repressed. And I realized that there was a massive differentiation between the two. And I began to understand that there were issues. And I decided to go and see a therapist, it was ludicrously cheap, £2 a session. So it was just really to get me out of the house. And at this point, I literally would barely get out of the house more than twice a week. You know, I'd kind of gone into myself intensely by my mid-30s. And at the end of it all, I had a catharsis about my father. that seemed to be in the conscious realm. It seemed to be about, look, I want a father, I want to be able to love him, I want to be able to express my love, and though he may not be able to reciprocate that. Once actually that set action, I wrote to him, I went to see him, and eventually it actualized into a growing relationship. I thought, actually, this isn't the end, this is the beginning, because it opens up a whole can of worms. And they'd mentioned this thing called analysis. And I kind of went back and I said, I literally walked in the room and she said, why are you back? And I couldn't speak and I just burst into floods of tears. And I knew, by then doing method, I knew that there were things going on inside of you need to start listening to. Not dominating with analytical, conscious, breaking it down consciously, but beginning to listen in a different way, being more intuitive about it. And so I said, can I set this up? And so I found the analyst, and for about 9 months we did 3 sessions a week. And then she said there's a program for 2-year commitment. That turned into 12.5 years.
I don't know that much about Jungian analysis. What does it entail?
I suppose it goes to this kind of notion of the inner self, that you're beginning to find the person, the potential that was created at birth. Mm-hmm. And you're beginning to deprocess the drama that you became because of the dysfunctional environment you're growing up in. And so what you initially grabbed hold of, I thought I was extroverted, I thought I was all these things, and these were just reactions to a chaotic and traumatizing environment. And bit by bit, I began to find the inner me. And all I can say is that you slowly notice the effect of the process by an altering sense of self. That literally the habits and agendas begin to drop away. It goes back to method. The actor must trust their truth, fundamentally. If they don't trust their truth, if they don't trust their impulse, their instinct, their intuition, they're lost as an artist. And I feel it's the same for a human being, that if they lose their sense of self, how do they know to relate? How can they say, I'm sorry, but I have a problem with that, when they're second-guessing themselves all the time? And I suppose with Jung, it's that kind of notion that the answer is within inside of you. You just have to find the skills or evolve the ability to hear them.
And so with method, I know that it's about getting in touch with your feelings and your unconscious. And you've said, I think, that it's therapeutic, but not the same as therapy.
Yeah.
So what's the difference?
There's a huge difference. Method is to make art come alive. Coming alive yourself is therapy and therapeutic, but it's not art. For art to happen, you have to take the art of someone else, which is a piece of text, a play, a script, a relationship with another person, not just yourself, called the character. If you bring them alive, that's the purpose of the process. In therapy or in analysis or whatever, it's really to bring yourself alive. The difference, I say, is that's to make you a good, a happy, good human being on your terms. The method is to make you a good actor.
But also, isn't it that in therapy you kind of make a narrative out of your life and you kind of gain an understanding of yourself and why you are the way you are, whereas with method you feel these feelings and you exploit them for the sake of the performance, but it's not necessarily, it doesn't have that analytical perspective.
Because I don't like the word exploit. I think you relate to it. I think that's why art is actually, that's why I think art is very spiritual. And I think, for instance, Jungian analysis is very spiritual, because for me the analysis didn't just help me find me and heal a lot of pain and expand me, but it gave me a much more profound relationship to life, to mortality, to the environment I live in, and so on and so forth. Not on any conscious level, but just much more on an unconscious perception. And I think it's true with the process that your engagement with either the things around you or the things inside of you is to make you at peace with a much bigger equation, which is that we are a kind of evolution of actions, or, coming together of nature, atoms as it were. And I think that sense of, once you get into it, once you have a sense of being of it, you feel a little less bereft at the personal journey that you're taking and the success or failures that go along the way. I still have regrets about my life. I mean, there was a good 15 years, and there are things I should have done in a natural stage that I never did, and those consequences still live with me now. But I'm much more willing to accept the limitations of my life, because I accept that life isn't a definitive. It's inevitably a selection of events and moments, and that actually, that as I am living them far more fruitfully and engaged now, then you have to accept that I always say to my students, wisdom is an expensive price. And the wisdom that I impart to my students and the wisdom that I put into my art and the pleasure I find in life has come from the experiences in the past. So the two are interlinked. You can't really be happy unless you learn to be sad. You can't really be alive unless you embrace your mortality. And I think the bottom line is, can you accept that you are a human being? And can your life be a contemplation in action of what it means to be human?
Thanks, Sam. We're going to take another quick break, but we'll be back afterwards. We're going to bring Liz and Bernadette back on, and we're going to take questions from the audience. So stay with us.